I never thought much about my friend's mother. To me, she was just another presence in the background, a quiet woman who moved around their house with a certain practiced ease, offering dinner, reminding my friend about unfinished chores, sometimes chuckling softly at our jokes, but never truly engaging. I had no reason to notice her. Until one night I did. It started on an evening like any other. I had stayed over at my friend's house longer than usual, the glow of the television flickering in the dimly lit living room. My friend had gone to bed early, leaving me alone with the last remnants of a half-finished movie and the soft hum of the ceiling fan. As I prepared to leave, I found her mother sitting on the back porch, a single cup of tea in her hands, staring into the dark expanse of their quiet yard. "You're still here?" she asked without turning her head. "Yeah," I said. "Heading out now." She nodded toward the empty chair beside her.
No rush.
"Sit for a minute." There was nothing strange about the offer, yet something in her tone made it feel less like an invitation and more like a quiet command. I hesitated, then lowered myself onto the chair. The night air was cool, thick with the scent of damp earth. It felt different from the countless times I had walked past this porch before, almost as if it belonged to a different world, one that only existed after dark. We sat in silence for a while, the occasional chirp of a cricket filling the spaces between us. Then she spoke. "It's funny how the night makes everything seem different. Quieter. Like the world's holding its breath." I glanced at her. In the dim light, her face looked softer, free from the usual weight of daily concerns. It was the first time I had ever truly looked at her, and something about the way she carried herself intrigued me. There was a calmness, a kind of solitude that felt intentional rather than lonely. "Do you always sit out here?" I asked. "Only when I can't sleep." She took a sip of her tea, then offered me a small, knowing smile.
"And you?"
"You seem like someone who stays up later than they should." I chuckled, a little surprised by how easily she read me. "Guilty." She set her cup down, her fingers tracing the rim absent-mindedly. "There's something peaceful about this time of night. No obligations. No expectations. Just existing." I nodded, understanding more than I expected to. Somewhere inside, a clock chimed softly, reminding me of the time. I should have left then, but I didn't. Instead, I stayed, listening to the quiet between us. And in that moment, without realizing it, a pattern had begun, one that neither of us would question, at least not yet. It didn't take long for our conversations to become routine. At first, it was incidental. I'd stay late at my friend's house, and before leaving, I'd find his mother on the back porch, sipping tea or simply watching the night stretch over the quiet neighborhood. But soon, I found myself lingering intentionally, waiting for the right moment to step outside, drawn by a curiosity I couldn't quite explain. She never asked why I stayed, and I never questioned why she welcomed my company. Some nights, we spoke in fragments, idle musings about the weather, the way the moon seemed fuller than usual, the small absurdities of life that only seemed worth mentioning in the hushed stillness of night. Other nights, we shared more. She told me about her childhood, about the small town she had left behind, and the roads she never took. "I used to dream of traveling," she admitted one night, swirling her tea absent-mindedly, "of packing a suitcase and disappearing for a while. But life has a way of clipping your wings before you realize you were even meant to fly."
I didn't know what to say to that.
There was a sadness in her voice, one that felt too heavy to touch. Instead, I told her about my own fears, how I often felt like I was drifting, waiting for something to happen but unsure of what that something even was. She listened with an attentiveness I wasn't used to, as if my words held weight, as if my thoughts weren't just passing distractions. "You remind me of myself," she said, tilting her head slightly. "Not in the way you think, but in the way you hesitate. You live too much in your own head." It was a strange thing to hear, especially from someone who was supposed to be just my friend's mother. But in those moments, she didn't feel like an authority figure or someone twice my age. She felt like a person, one who understood things about me that even my friend didn't. The secrecy of it all made it feel different. We never spoke about our late-night conversations during the day. At breakfast, She was just his mother again, polite, distant, a woman who asked if we wanted more toast, but never acknowledged the words we had exchanged under the cover of darkness. My friend, oblivious, carried on as usual. But as the nights passed, something shifted. One evening, as I stood up to leave, she reached out and lightly touched my wrist. "Stay a little longer," she said. There was something unfamiliar in her voice, something that made my pulse quicken. I hesitated. For the first time, I wondered if this quiet companionship had started to mean something different to her. Or maybe, I realized with a strange sense of unease, it had already started to mean something different to me. I started noticing the changes before I could admit they were happening. The way she lingered a little longer before saying goodnight. The way her voice softened when she spoke to me, different from how she spoke to her son. The way her fingers traced the rim of her teacup, as if she were stalling, stretching time in the space between us. I told myself it was nothing, that I was imagining things. But then my friend noticed something too. "You've been here late a lot," he said one afternoon, tossing a controller onto his bed. "What? Is my mom teaching you how to knit or something?" I laughed it off, shrugged. "She's just easy to talk to." He made a face, unimpressed. "She's my mom. She doesn't talk to anyone." The words sat heavy in my mind. He wasn't wrong. She had always been a private person, floating through the house like a ghost, her presence acknowledged but never questioned. But now I was questioning everything. That night, I found her on the porch again, but something was different. The air felt heavier, the silence more fragile. She was holding something in her hands, a small wooden box, old and worn at the edges. Without speaking, she opened it, revealing a stack of yellowed letters tied with a faded ribbon. She hesitated before picking one up, unfolding it carefully, her fingers trembling. "I used to write to someone," she said quietly. "A long time ago." The paper rustled as she smoothed it over her lap. The ink was faded, the handwriting delicate. I only caught glimpses of the words, "I miss you. I shouldn't feel this way. If things were different." She exhaled, a slow, measured breath. "We were supposed to leave together. He asked me to run away with him." Her lips pressed into a thin line, and for the first time, I saw something raw in her eyes. Regret. Longing. Something deeper than sadness. "What happened?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She swallowed hard. I said no. The quiet stretched between us, thick and suffocating. I wanted to ask why, wanted to understand the weight of that decision. But before I could, she looked at me. Not just at me, but through me. "I see a lot of him in you." Her voice was softer now, almost wistful. That same hesitation, that same fear of the unknown. A chill crawled down my spine. I wasn't sure what unsettled me more, the way she looked at me, or the unspoken truth hanging in the air between us. Somewhere inside, a door closed. Footsteps. My friend. She snapped the box shut. The moment was gone. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, that I had stepped into something far bigger than myself. And for the first time, I wasn't sure I wanted to know where it would lead. I should have pulled away. I should have let those late-night conversations fade into memory, left them untouched like the letters she kept hidden away. But I didn't. Instead, I kept returning, drawn to something I couldn't name. The past she carried, the loneliness she masked, the way she looked at me like I was something unfinished, something she understood. But secrets have a way of unraveling. One evening, as I lingered on the porch, my friend's voice cut through the night. "What the hell is this?" I turned, my stomach twisting. He stood in the doorway, arms crossed, suspicion sharp in his eyes. His mother remained still, her fingers curled around her teacup, but I saw the flicker of something, guilt, maybe, or something worse. "You're always out here," he said, his voice low, tight. "Always talking. About what?" I opened my mouth, searching for a lie, but she spoke first. "Nothing that concerns you." A simple answer, but the weight behind it was devastating. His jaw clenched. "You never talked to me like that." Silence. He looked at me then, and I hated the way his expression shifted, realization dawning. It wasn't just her.
It was me too.
He shook his head, stepping back. This is messed up. He left before I could find the words to stop him. For the first time, I saw her hesitate. He'll calm down, she murmured, but the certainty wasn't there. And that's when I knew this had never been just about late-night talks. Not for her. Not for me. I stood up, heart pounding. I shouldn't come back. She looked up at me, something unreadable in her eyes. No, she said quietly. You shouldn't. I turned, stepping off the porch, feeling the night press against me. But as I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was leaving something unfinished. A question left unasked. A path left unexplored. I never went back. My friend never spoke about that night again, but things were different. A quiet distance settled between us, something unspoken but permanent. And her? She became a shadow again, slipping back into the background, her presence as quiet as ever. But sometimes, when I passed by their house late at night, I caught a glimpse of her on the porch, staring into the darkness, lost in something I would never understand. And maybe that was for the best.